A warm welcome to all participants at this third day of the Educate.be conference on the crucial role of all education heroes in the recovery phase post-COVID-19, organized by the Belgian Platform for Education and Development with the support of VVOB, APV, and the Belgian government. It's now 1:30 p.m. Belgian time, and this session will last 1.5 hours. So we will end at 3 p.m. Belgian time. Today, we will focus on remedial teaching to fight the COVID learning crisis in Africa. More than 1.5 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, students in many African countries are still affected by partial or full school closures. School closures were the longest in Eastern and Southern Africa, where a third of countries closed schools for 40 or even more weeks. School closures risk reversing the trend toward higher participation at school and better learning outcomes observed over the last 2 decades in the continent. In supporting African countries in their efforts to mitigate the impact of school closures and address learning losses, catch-up programs are a priority action to make a difference in the short run. As children return to school, teaching at the right level, abbreviated as TARL, recommends connecting assessment with action and focusing on the foundations to ensure equitable learning for all. In this session, we will share the key features and lessons learned from the TAR approach in the African context, complemented with insights from implementation in Zambia and Nigeria. And of course, our speakers will be delighted to reflect on your questions on remedial teaching. This session has been organized by VVOB, UNICEF Belgium, Pratam, and TARL Africa. My name is Peter van Peterhem. I'm a professor in education sciences at the University of Antwerp, Belgium, and I will be your host today. I'm very happy that I'm not alone in this studio and that I can count on the support of Inge van de Vijveren, Senior Education Advisor at VVOB. And in preparation of this session, we could also count on the support of our colleagues Sophie Cabu from VVOB and Helena Hovaert from UNICEF Belgium. During each of the 3 interventions, the audience can put questions in the chat. You can find the chat button on the right of your screen. Inge monitors the chat during the presentations, and we will have time for 2 or maybe 3 questions for clarification after each intervention. And a more in-depth discussion is foreseen in the last part of this session. We have 2 interpreters, English and French, and thanks in advance to them for the great and the very difficult job that they do. If you want to hear the French version, activate the button on your screen. All presentations this afternoon will be in English, by the way. I also want to highlight that this session will be recorded. So let's start with our first speaker, Devyani Parshud, who is joining us from New Delhi in India. Devyani Parshud is the head of Pratam International Collaboration Unit, supporting partners to adapt and apply Pratam's innovations to contexts outside India. As part of the TAR Africa initiative focused on sub-Saharan Africa, Devyani leads technical strategy and approach and manages partner relationships across several TAR Africa countries. She also supports donor relationships and grant management. She further provides strategic oversight for TAR in, for instance, Côte d'Ivoire, Kenya, and Zambia. And in addition to these roles, Diviana leads communications for Pratam. She joined Pratam in 2013, and before that, she was working in advisory services. She has an MBA from the IESI Business School of Barcelona, Spain, and she also holds a bachelor's in economics. Deviana, the floor is yours for sharing your experience on teaching at the right level.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, for that lovely introduction and for setting the context for our session today. As Peter mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about teaching at the right level, just to give you an overview and a sense of how the approach was developed and where it's coming from. But you're really going to get the exciting inputs from Anatora and our colleagues from UNICEF Nigeria as we move forward in today's presentation. So before I dive into teaching at the right level, let's go a bit into the background and talk about things, some which we know, some which we are thinking about, and some which we may not know as yet. So the first thing that we all know, and I'm sure you all will agree with me, is that around the globe, more and more children are enrolled in school. The graph that you see here is showing you enrollment rates rising rapidly over time across the globe. The red line that you see, which is going to be of interest to us today, is sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see that steep growth in school enrollments. By 2000 already, we were close to universal enrollment across most regions. And by 2010, you can see a region like sub-Saharan Africa had caught up even further. But the question is, does schooling really equal learning? Unfortunately not. I think all of us here are aware that while more and more children are going to school, they aren't necessarily learning at the pace that they are expected to be. Not only that, learning levels are low and are also varied. If you look at the data on your screen, which is from citizen-led assessments in Uganda, India, and Mexico, you can see that large proportions of children in grade 3 were lagging behind in reading skills even before COVID-19. So if you look at the data from Uganda, you can see that about 40% of children could not even recognize letters in the local language as yet. This is data from 2019 at a nationally representative level. The 2018 ASER data from India shows us the situation is slightly better in India, but still you have more than 70% of children who are in grade 3 but unable to read even at grade 2 level in their local languages. And similarly, if you look at Mexico, which again seems to be a bit better off, this regional data shows us that still more than 50% of children in grade 3 are not yet reading fluently. So this is not a challenge specific to a particular region or a particular country. This is really a global crisis. And what happens after COVID-19? I think we'll all agree that across the globe, the extent of learning loss is expected to vary. And not just across the globe, but across also different kinds of situations that children find themselves in. But if you look at the simulation on your left, which uses the learning adjusted years of schooling measure to understand what kind of loss we're expecting, you can see that learning will fall about close to a year's worth, even in just 7 months of school closure. And in contexts like India, schools have been closed for much longer. We also know from past experiences, such as the Pakistan earthquake in 2005 and Hurricane Katrina in the same year as well, that even after children come back to school, these learning losses continue over time. So we saw that students in Pakistan who had missed 3 months of school, even 4 years after the earthquake, for example, were 1.5 years behind where they should have been. So what can we do about this? You might be thinking. Of course, you have to admit that with so many children across the globe having been out of school for a long period of time, this is not an easy task that we're dealing with. We've also seen that learning losses are going to be severe. So, what are some ideas to keep in mind as we think about helping systems recover? The first, of course, which we've seen from our experience over the years, is to really understand the problem, understand what children know, what they don't know, and based on this, really define clear goals that are achievable. Having a clear approach and channel of delivery is, of course, very important. So, not just saying this is what we want to achieve, but being very deliberate about how we're going to get there. Making sure that we are planning our activities, our implementation to ensure smooth delivery, and identifying areas that need specific attention in each education system so that those gaps can be filled. And of course, making sure that we're measuring and learning to be sure that we're actually making progress. So, not just hypothetically hoping that we're improving children's skills, but actually being able to measure this. One example of interventions that have tried to do this, even in pre COVID times, are teaching at the right level. And now I'm going to tell you more about teaching at the right level. So before I dig into the nitty-gritties of the approach, I thought I'd take us through a bit of a journey of the past many years of the development of teaching at the right level. So teaching at the right level was developed in India by NGO Pratham, where I belong as well, in the early 2000s. And already from 2001, we had set out on a journey of research and evaluation to really understand the effectiveness of the approach. In this journey, we had our research partners, JPAL, along with us, who helped us understand what's working and what's not working, and what are some areas that we can further improve. We tried the approach with community volunteers as pull-out programs in schools, in community classes, and we saw that the methodology works. But then we started to think about what's really a scalable, sustainable model for delivering an innovation like teaching at the right level in the Indian context. We tried intensive programs run by instructors. We tried school teacher-led programs as part of the school system. And we found that these are some clear pathways to ensure scalable, sustainable teaching at the right level delivery. And it was really this that then led to our belief that this can be taken to contexts outside India as well. And the journey on piloting and scaling up in Africa began with Zambia in 2016 and heading to Nigeria in 2018, both which you're going to hear more about from my other presenters today. So where are we today? Through Teaching at the Right Level Africa, the approach has spread to many countries across the continent. Teaching at the Right Level Africa is a joint initiative between JPAL and Pratham that is helping our partners, governments, to develop teaching at the right level programs suited to their context. You're going to hear more about Zambia, which is a government-led program. You're going to hear more about Nigeria, where we began working with UNICEF in emergency contexts. But the movement continues to grow across the continent. So what's really teaching at the right level trying to do? If you look at a classroom, what's happening with teaching at the right level is that we're moving away from age grade teaching to focusing on children's current learning levels. So in a normal classroom, you would find that children are organized by grades. So here you can see grades 3, 4, and 5. You have children who are by grade, but you also see significant variation in each grade. So not only is the teacher worried about what to teach, she's also worried about who to teach, struggling with this wide range of variation in her classroom. Now, if you look at the same set of classes organized for teaching at the right level, we are moving away from this row-based organization to really thinking about reconstructing the way we work with children. So you have children organized by level rather than by grade. So you have, let's say, about beginner and letter level children working together, those who are able to read words and paragraphs together, and those who are already reading fluently working together. So now, while each teacher has about the same number of children, she is able to focus on the current level of children and help them move forward using appropriate activities and materials. So what does this look like in terms of practice? We're moving away from this goal of completing the curriculum to really focusing on foundational skills for all and making sure that our measurement, our assessments are aligned with these goals. We have simple assessments, not school end pen and paper assessments that are difficult to use, but really oral one-on-one assessments that empower the teacher to take action immediately. We move away from age grade organization to grouping children by level so that they can make quick progress. And we start teaching at the level of the child rather than where we expect them to be. So moving away from curriculum, from whole class instruction to really helping children progress forward. And the most important part is that this is fun, this is engaging, children love it, and they have fun while they're learning. But the important part also is that to do this in an education system, alignment across the system is absolutely essential. So it begins with, first of all, changing the way we think about training of teachers. So training is practical. It gives teachers actionable ideas on what to do in the classroom. And training is done by people who have done it themselves. So leaders of practice are created within education systems who are trained, practice the approach, and only then take it forward. It is these same leaders of practice who provide support to teachers as they are trying to make these big adjustments in the classroom. And then we have monitoring and review processes, which are simple, which are quick, which promote data for action and decision making, and are built into programmatic activities as opposed to being an external process. When we go back to the classroom, there are very few simple steps that are involved in teaching at the right level. So the first is the assessment. We begin with a simple one-on-one assessment for reading and math that helps us group children by level rather than by grade. Simple activities are used for each group and children make progress. They work not only in big groups, in small groups, but also individually. And as they make progress, they move quickly onto the next group. And similar assessments are used on a periodic basis to track progress. So what have we really learned over the years with teaching at the right level? I think the first most important point is that children learn quickly through this approach. And the interesting part is that those at the lowest levels of learning actually benefit the most. We're going to see some data from Zambia that will give you a glimpse into this. We've also seen that TAL is flexible enough to be adapted to different contexts, to different models. The Zambian model is one where it's led by the government system. The Nigerian model is led by the government system, but in an emergency context. There are also programming being developed for refugee contexts, different types of approaches suited to the needs of a particular region. We've also learned that when we are working with school systems, it's important to have dedicated time so that teachers don't go back to business as usual. And this is going to be very, very important as school systems come back from COVID-19. If foundational skills for all are really a priority for us, then we need to show it in our timetable. We've also seen that just providing materials and doing teacher training is not enough. Teachers need support. TAL is simple, but it requires effort. It's a big shift from regular practice. So making sure that teachers have the support that they need to continue to do this well is important. It's important for systems to have adequate technical support, clear definition of who's doing what, and measurement processes that help us understand the progress that we are making. And lastly, we've learned that successful and scalable programs can be built that are actually owned and led by education systems. And again, Zambia is a very exciting example of that. But of course, there's still a lot more to learn. So thank you very much for giving me your time today. I look forward to your questions. But more importantly, I look forward to hearing from Anathora and from our colleagues at UNICEF Nigeria on how things are panning out for teaching at the right level in these contexts. So thanks so much, Peter. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Divyani. This was a very insightful presentation to get to know teaching at the right level. Thanks for this. We received some questions for clarification from our audience, which we would like to share with you. And in the meanwhile, I still invite the participants to continue putting their questions in the chat. A first question that I have for you, Divyani, is whether this teaching at the right level approach can also be applied at higher ages and also for other skills than foundational skills.
Thanks so much, Peter. That's a great question. So in India, we actually found that teaching at the right level can be applied to older children as well. So we have developed teaching at the right level programs that have focused on children aged 11 to 14. And we have found that with some modifications, some adjustments, maybe to some of the content, some of the activities, the approach can be adapted for slightly older children. In fact, in Uganda, with VVOB, we currently have a program that is working with overage for grade adolescents using teaching at the right level. So very easily adaptable to children, older children, to build their reading and math skills. We've also seen that we can adjust this to for much older students. We have programming in India for women who have dropped out of school before completing secondary education, and we have had an adaptation of the teaching at the right level methodology being used for these women as well, aged between, let's say, 18 to 55 years of age. What's also important to learn is that teaching at the right level is, of course, very flexible and can be applied to many different contexts. So the second part of your question, sorry, if you could remind me.
Yeah, that referred to the question whether other skills than foundational skills
Yes, exactly.
can be applied.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So while teaching at the right level is very focused on building reading and math skills, there are some practices within the approach that become relevant for general teaching. So for example, teaching at the right level often has children learning in groups, a lot of peer learning, a lot of teamwork, collaboration. Once children acquire these skills, let's say in a teaching at the right level setting, these skills can easily be taken by teachers into their normal everyday curriculum teaching. Another aspect of teaching at the right level, of course, is taking children ahead from where they are. So if this is a practice, for example, that teachers can apply when teaching the curriculum based on their understanding of what children are able to follow, that's also a good, I'd say, almost spillover effect that teaching at the right level can have. However, we found that using teaching at the right level to break down the curriculum and really teach it exactly the same way is something probably that doesn't require that kind of effort, because the aim is really to ensure that once children have the basic reading and math skills using the teaching at the right level approach, then they are able to move forward with curriculum learning in a better manner. So while there can be some practices that can be taken forward, we haven't yet tried to apply teaching at the right level to teach higher order subjects.
Okay. In the meanwhile, we have another very interesting question, knowing that we are focusing on remedial teaching this afternoon. And the question there is how successful the TOR approach is for children with disabilities. And also, does it lead to further segregation or even discrimination if the children are not able to make progress?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Peter. And as Pratham, as TAL Africa, VVOB, we have not yet done structured tests of how teaching at the right level can be adapted for children with disabilities. But this is definitely something that's on our agenda. However, anecdotally, we have heard from teachers in India, in Zambia, that they are able to apply the teaching at the right level approach based on their understanding of good practices of working with children with disabilities in the classroom. So some examples of where there may be challenges: many teaching at the right level activities require physical participation of children. However, because the activities are simple enough, they can be adjusted quite easily to engage children who are not able to participate physically in the activity. Teaching at the right level can be thought to lead to discrimination, to segregation. But because there is a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaboration built into the activities, built into the approach, we have seen that even when children are not able to keep up, their peers, the teachers, are able to keep them engaged in the activities. And it's not about moving at a steady pace. Because you're allowing children to move at their own pace in a teaching at the right level classroom, children will continue to be involved, even if for some reason, out of the control of the teacher, not being addressed by the approach, they're not able to make progress. One of the challenges we actually see, which is not attached to issues out of our control, is that because in the African context, there are such large proportions of children who are at the lowest levels of reading and math, that even after about 60 to 70 hours of implementing teaching at the right level activities, there might be a significant proportion of children who are still left behind. They're still at the lowest levels of learning. So we are trying to adjust our approach now to deal with this very specific context in some African countries to see how can we focus more on the children at the lowest levels so that we are able to ensure that everybody moves forward quickly and not just 90% of the class.
Okay, thank you very much. There are still questions coming, but I suggest that we move those to the general Q&A at the end of this session. So thank you very much for this additional information, Devyani. We will hear more from you again later this afternoon. And let us now go to Zambia, where we will meet Anne Tura. Anne Tura Verdui Mutale is the education manager for the Catch-up project in Zambia. She leads the VVOB team supporting the ministry's TORL approach, and she provides overall strategic direction for the project, coordination and technical support for the Ministry of General Education on ongoing activities, monitoring and evaluation, learning, innovation, and scaling of the program. Anne Tura, we are very curious to learn more about the TORL approach in the Zambian context. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peter, for that introduction. And thank you, Devyani, for setting the context and giving us that wonderful overview of the TORL approach across the continent. Just to get you into the feel of our Zambian context, I'll actually start the presentation with a very short video just to transport you into our context and see where we work and what it looks like. Great. So as you can see, many of our schools look actually quite a lot like that one, and that is an actual catch-up class filmed in southern province of Zambia. So as Devyani mentioned, as much as we have very dedicated teachers in the Zambian schools, we have got high enrollment, more learners than ever actually coming to school, we have also been hit by the learning crisis. And we see that many of the learners are lacking foundational reading and math skills across grades, but especially if we look here at the example that I have on the screen, the grade 5 national assessment results, typically the average score is between 30 to 40 out of 100 points for grade 5 learners in standardized government texts. tests. And we've seen that this has persisted the last few decades, and if anything, actually getting worse. Just to back this up with some more data, when we look at our own baseline data that we have in the catch-up program, we see that when we assess the children in grades 3, 4, and 5, so these are typically from 8 to 12 years old, we actually see that about a third of them cannot even recognize letters. If you add those that can recognize letters but not yet read words, you are at half of the learners. If you add those that can read words but not sentences, you are suddenly at 60%. So it's only about 30% or so of learners that are able to read sentences, paragraphs, or stories. And this is for grades 3, 4, 5 combined. This is, of course, a major challenge, and not only for the learners themselves, but also for teachers, because as you can see, the reading levels are low, but the distribution is also very varied. And for numeracy, for mathematics, this is often worse. So as a teacher, you know, who should be taught, you know, what should be taught, how do you handle this? So even after 3 years in school, we find that the reading levels are still a major challenge. And this is where, you know, building on how Devyani explained the approach, when we actually introduced the teaching at the right level approach, the catch-up program, as we call it in Zambia, we've seen that children are able to move very fast from one level to another. So when you give them teaching at the right level, activities that are suitable for where they are, we have really seen this fast progression. So from the table, you can see on the screen, let me make sure that I've changed. Yes, the table you can see on the screen now. You can see our baseline, midline, endline results from 2019. I chose 2019 because that was our last normal year before COVID. So if you read it vertically, you can see that our baseline, you know, was similar to what I explained in the previous slide, where we had about, you know, 30% not even being able to recognize letters. And as Devyani said, you know, the lowest levels actually benefit the most and move the fastest. So after just 6 months of implementation, 1 hour a day after school hours, we were down to 9% of learners that could not recognize letters. And you see these lower levels move quite a lot. And if we just now focus on the paragraph story level, which are the readers, we actually see that we started off with about 35% readers in 2019, and after 6 months, we ended at 56%. So that is quite a dramatic change. And remember that these learners, you know, will have catch up even the following year and the following year. So by the time they leave grade 5, most of them are actually able to read if they've been following the program. We also see similar results for numeracy, though multiplication and division tends to move more slowly than addition and subtraction. I noticed a question from the audience about, you know, is there stigmatization in terms of being in a level, but when the progression is this fast, there is not much time to be stuck in a level, and there's really that very quick graduation from one group to another. And I think the way we teach, the way the activities are so engaging and so fun that the teachers don't really start thinking about who is there, they just focus on actually enjoying the lessons. So what this shows us is, as Devyani said, big changes are possible in a short period of time. I now want to take a small step just to give an overview of the Zambian story. So the Zambian story goes back to roughly 2015-16. That's when the Ministry of Education acknowledged that they had a major learning crisis in Zambia, and they started looking for possible solutions. And almost by accident, they came across the trial method from India. And very quickly, they managed to get in touch. They traveled to India, they learned, they managed to get funding for the pilot from UNICEF. The pilot showed very good results. So then they managed to get funding for scale. This now slowly scaled in 2 of the 10 provinces, and, you know, started with 80 schools. And by January 2020, we were in 1,800 schools, which are all the government schools in the 2 provinces of Zambia. And funding was coming to an end, but since the results were so solid, we actually have seen quite a few partners coming on board. And so the last 1 year has been extremely eventful for the catch-up program. We have Lego Foundation coming on board with the support to Lusaka province, which is the capital province. We started off with 4 districts there last year, and we are now adding the final 3 districts, including the capital city itself. We also had emergency support from the Global Partnership for Education through UNICEF to actually reach out to 3 new provinces, to some selected districts as well, operating in, of course, the emergency context of COVID. And we are in quite advanced discussions about continued funding, I think, to Southern Eastern and some of these GPE provinces as well, though it's not fully confirmed. And we have confirmed funding for Luapula province and Central province. So if you summarize, we are actually looking at being in 7 or 8 out of 10 provinces in the next few years, which is quite an exponential growth and which is quite exciting. So Devyani gave us the overview of how the TAL model works. And I just wanted to provide this snapshot slide of how it looks like in Zambia. So as mentioned, we target grades 3, 4, and 5, and they are typically aged from 8 to 12 years old. As Devyani mentioned, there is often a spillover effect. We've heard in a lot of schools when we go to visit that because it's so effective, they start using it for grades 1 and 2. They even go to grade 6, 7. Some even go all the grades up to grade 12. I was in a school yesterday which said that. I've also visited schools where they say they use it for the adult literacy evening classes as well. So it is a methodology that once embraced at the school level takes on a life of its own and spreads to others. But in terms of the standard program, the formal target group is those 3 grades, because we think the learners need, a few years of exposure to be mature enough to fully benefit, though of course some activities are definitely suitable as more of a startup rather than catch-up. The instructors in Zambia are government employed school teachers, so we do not provide any extra incentives, remunerations. We use the government teachers and work through the government system. The timing is typically 1 hour in between or after or before the regular hours. Typically in Zambia, you have morning classes, evening class, or afternoon classes where teachers teach the same twice, but as children, you only come in the morning or only come in the evening. So typically catch-up is in between those 2 sessions to allow children from both morning and afternoon classes to be combined by a level. We typically have been running catch-up 2 out of 3 terms, so typically from January to July. However, with the coming of COVID, which I'll talk a bit more about, the government actually instructed schools to also implement catch-up in the 3rd term, which is this last term that is from August to December. It's 1 hour per day, as mentioned. Literacy and numeracy typically alternate. So depending on the need of the school, maybe you have literacy Monday to Wednesday, numeracy Thursday, Friday, or the opposite. We have 3 major assessment points: baseline, midline, endline, though schools also do monthly tracking to see where their learners are. Materials are very basic, very simple. We provide teacher guides, and as you can see from the pictures, the teachers are quite involved in also creating materials to be used in the classroom themselves. So sticks, stones, cardboard, syllables, syllabic charts, number charts, and pictures and the like. So quite a lot of the material is generated locally in the children's local language. The mentoring component is big. We work with the district, the zonal level in Zambia who support schools. We also have staff at district level as well as national level. So we work very closely with the ministry. I wanted to just give a snapshot of what really characterizes a catch-up lesson. And I would say it's joyful, it's challenging, it pushes limits, there are songs, there are games, locally made materials, as mentioned, there's learning through play. As Devyani said, there are groups, there's peer-to-peer learning, it's captivating. The content is contextualized and adapted. We use familiar situations for the children, even for word problems. Even the reading materials is, something that they can relate to. It's interactive, there's laughter. We have, of course, assessments, and most of all, it is fun and it is engaging. Even the teachers have fun, actually. So if we take again another look at our results, as I had hinted in the earlier slides, you could see this quite solid movement. And the interesting part that we've seen, which is quite, perplexing, is that year on year, our results are getting better. So when we had few schools in the pilot, we saw a 7 percentage point increase in learners, 13 percentage point increase in the numeracy skills. But when we went to scale, when we were over 1,000 schools, when you would expect, the efforts to be diluted, we see that because the ministry system at that point owns it, drives it, we see increases of 21, 24% in only 6 months, in less than 60 contact hours. We were expecting to see that in 2020 as well, but we did have a school closure of about 7.5 months. So as much as we were steadily progressing from January to March, between March and October, when schools were closed, we saw a drop in learning levels. So this is just a different visualization, of where we expected to be in 2020 and where we ended up being. The exciting thing, though, is that in 2021, as schools were back, they were open, there were reduced contact hours, there are alternate classes. We still have started seeing those rapid results again, especially for the lower levels, as Devyani mentioned. So this shows that our catch-up remains effective in the pandemic, post-pandemic context, where you've had school closures, you've got reduced regular contact hours. But because, the teachers actually quickly reassess children, make sure that they are in the right levels. Sorry, I forgot to show you the next slide, so I'm just going to jump it. But this is the visualization of where we expect it to be versus the actual. So this shows us that, learners, when they are taught at their actual level, there's quite a quick recovery. Even though there's been learning loss, a drop in skills, we are able to quickly help them to push back up to where they were. So if you see our 2021 results, we had assessments in February, and we had some assessments in April. The end line is going to be in November, since we've been implementing throughout the year. But you can see here that East and Southern, our existing provinces, have got quite some, solid gains here. For literacy, 9%, 7% in 2 months. And for some schools, it was even a month because they were slow to start. And for numeracy, you also see between 10 to 15% improvements. And so, of course, we are all waiting to see what the end line is going to look like. So what are some of the lessons that we've seen from this? What we've, of course, seen, which we looked at, is that the pandemic school closures caused stagnation in learning levels and in some cases a drop. However, post the closures, catch-up has showed ability to rapidly accelerate learning in 3 provinces, including the new province, a province which was trained during COVID, which was, started to implement just as schools reopened. We have been able to see these same results. Another thing that we have seen is that as the pandemic worsened the learning crisis, the Ministry of Education and its partners have made catch-up a key priority. And the program is now likely to cover primary schools in most of the country. And the ambition of the ministry is to actually go national. So just to show you what it looks like, you see the dark green is our strongholds, where the program is at full scale. The light green is where we have already reached, some districts. For Lusaka, we will reach all districts in 2022. And then the yellow ones is where expansion is likely from next year, and then the red and orange is where we are not quite sure when further expansion will be possible. And this has all come together the last 1 year. So COVID has actually really put catch-up trial on the agenda in Zambia, and it is really growing and becoming institutionalized. We are supported by a coalition of actors. Of course, we work with and through the Ministry of Education. We are in a very, very close partnership with TARL, which is, of course, Pratham, JPAL combined. TARL Africa is our technical partner. As VVOB, we are the present ones in country. And then we have funding from USAID, we have funding from UNICEF, we have funding from the Lego Foundation, and a number of other partners that are coming on board. So what are some key lessons that we can share? Of course, adding to what Devyani also already shared as lessons overall as well. The COVID-19's worsening of the learning crisis has actually put the learning crisis on the agenda. It has also made it more acceptable to talk about the learning crisis, to acknowledge it. And this has resulted in the ministry and its partners prioritizing foundational skills and accelerating the program. Actually, the PS, the permanent secretary, said that even if you don't teach any regular class, now that we have reduced contact hours, at least make sure the children receive their catch-up classes, because at this point in time, we need to make sure that everyone breaks through to reading and of course in numeracy as well. So it has really been that moment of reckoning. At the core in Zambia, as mentioned, is that integration in the government system. And we think our success is largely due to that integration. And because it is so well integrated, Ministry of Education could also make it a national priority when reopening schools, and of course, even when running schools in a different way. The initial investment in training of the ministry at all levels, combined with mentoring and coaching to establish the program, is key. And thereafter, we have seen that it can be sustained through, pre-service, in-service ministry trainings, combined with government monitoring and mentoring, because Southern and Eastern Province have really shown us that they are able to continue holding this program, even as we've been scaling down and reducing our support. And with those final words, I will end here and open up for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Annatura, for introducing us to the catch-up projects in Zambia. It's great to see how TOR was contextualized for the Zambian context. We also received some questions from the audience, but I'm afraid we still have time for one question left, at least at this very moment. One of the questions that we have had is whether you could explain a little bit more about what happened when the schools reopened. You mentioned, for instance, the reduced contact hours. Can you expand on that?
Yes. So what happened is that schools were closed for about 7.5 months. And when they reopened, children had to be in smaller groups. Some would come on alternate days, some would come alternate times. So there was really quite some, reduced contact, more distance, smaller groups. And what we heard from many schools is that they felt catch-up was helping them, because already in catch-up, you have smaller groups, by level rather than the whole class. So by using that methodology, they were actually able to comply with the COVID prevention measures that the ministry had introduced. We have actually had several school closures. Even in 2021, schools opened late due to the second wave. We opened, I think, more than a month and a half late. And again, catch-up was emphasized as, the main strategy to ensure that children were quickly getting used to being back in school, quickly regaining their lost skills, if it were, and pushing on. And of course, also combined with the regular classes. We again had schools closed with the third wave in June, July, August. And as soon as schools opened, ministry really emphasized the need to also immediately resume catch-up classes. And now, of course, we are hoping that we won't have further school closures, but let's see. But at least we've seen that catch-up has been prioritized every time schools open.
Okay, thank you. Also, thank you to the audience for asking more questions, but especially thanks for Annatura for the clarifications that you gave. As I said, you can still post questions for Annatura in the chats. And now we are going to travel from Zambia, direction northwest to Nigeria, where we can meet Yusuf. Yusuf Ismail is currently a UNICEF National Education Specialist, supporting the implementation of foundational literacy and numeracy interventions in northeast Nigeria. And he holds this position since 2017. Yusuf first led the pilot of TOR in the Borno state in 2018 with really impressive results. The results achieved during the pilot of the TOR program in that particular state, in Borno State, contributed to the government's buy-in to scale up the intervention, not just to Borno, but also to neighboring states in the northeast and the northwest of Nigeria. Yusuf obtained a PhD in measurement and evaluation in education from the University of Maiduguri in 2014. And he also holds a certificate of designation as a national trainer in open and distance learning from the Open University in the United Kingdom from 2011 on. Yusuf, we would like to hear more from your experiences with TOR in Nigeria. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I want to start by thanking the organizers as well as the previous presenters. Although I was not there, I was engaged in another meeting. I have just joined, but I know they have talked around the same theme that I'm going to talk about. I think my slide will be presented from there. I'm a bit challenged to see the screen. If the audience will confirm seeing my screen or my presentation. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, Yusuf, we can see your presentation. You can carry on.
Okay, then as you can see, mine is sharing our experience about adaptation of student at the level to a blended learning during the time of school closure as a result of COVID across Nigeria, but this is a case of Northeast Nigeria where TAL has been piloted successfully and is being scaled up. Before I proceed, just as I know Divyani has presented the situation of education across the globe in this presentation, I'm narrowing it down to Nigeria, just as other countries in terms of enrollment and participation in the last 5 years, we have seen an increase of over 5 million enrollment of children into school in Nigeria. And also we have seen improvement in terms of gender parity and increase from 0.89 to 0.994. But just like other sub-Saharan African countries, our challenge is not bringing more children to school, but these children are learning. As you can see in national education data survey, we found that half of grade 3 learners across Nigeria cannot read a word or do simple operation, just as Deviani presented. And this result, if you move to the regions, you will see large regional disparity as well as gender divide, as you can see in the next slide, where we have presented our case in Northeast Nigeria. You can see about 27% of children in Northeast Nigeria are literate, but if you look at Southwest Nigeria, you will see over 80% are literate. This is within a region, so also with a numeracy over 50-point disparity. This is the situation of Northeast Nigeria as we are trying to battle with more than a decade-old insurgency that lead to school closure for more than 24 months at a point. This is a region where more than 645 teachers were killed. This is a region where more than 1,200 schools were either destroyed or closed because of the insurgency. Still, as I'm talking to you, we have over 824 schools remain closed. This has been the situation, but we use teaching at the right level to improve the situation. as we are trying to scale it up, then we experience school closure for over 7 months due to COVID. Specifically, if you look at Northeast Nigeria, where we are experiencing crisis, in total about 4.2 million learners were affected, but out of this, we have over 400,000 that are most vulnerable from the internally displaced person camps. So this closure due to COVID, coupled with the closure due to crisis, further added to the loss of learning by the school closure. As we are using teaching at the right level to bridge this gap, we have fully prepared for a scale up to reach over 370 learners with training of over 9,000 teachers to be able to support these learners across the three Bay state of Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. Then we had the news of school closure, which lasted for over 7 months. When it started, there was no hope of getting the school back within shortest possible time. Then we said, as we are scaling up, we need to devise means of seeing that we have really continue so that at least we can maintain the gain made through teaching at the right level. So as we are preparing to scale up, by then we have started training of master trainers to teach this number. Then COVID came in, we were stopped, it was closed. Then we said, no, we need to think out of the box and have alternative. Then we decided to adapt teaching at the right level into the remote learning. By then, different government agencies across the Northeast have started remote learning through radio to ensure continuity of learning for primary school kids. We embarked on consultation, and Diviani is here. They are our technical partners. We consult with them with other partners to see if there is example of adapting teaching at the right level to remote learning. By then there was none, but we have to learn together on how to go about it. We had useful consultation, and we got a lot of suggestions on how to go about adapting teaching at the right level to remote learning. Then we proceeded to start that, and we said we need to do this without tampering with the core tenets or key requirements of teaching at the right level. Then we said, since it is a pilot, let's start with small number of schools. We decided to pilot in 3 schools, and we conducted it for a period of 4 weeks, using 10 hours for each of the learning levels that we determined. But we started with orientation of already trained master trainers and teachers who are facilitating teaching at the right level face to face. We said they need to be orientated and give them a coaching on how to go about implementing or presenting teaching at the right level to learners using a blended mode of delivery. This orientation lasted for 2 hours. So all the stakeholders were sensitized, and they got orientation on how to go about delivering teaching at the right level remotely. So immediately after the orientation, we started developing learning materials for these learners, because you have to reach them in their communities or in their own homes. We decided on the minimum package that each learner required. So it took us 11 days to prepare these materials using low cost or sometimes no cost materials with the trained master trainers and teachers. So after a period of 11 days, we embarked on distribution of learning materials through community structures. We have what is called school-based management. Here you can see a parcel that is due to a learner with all the required learning materials, including worksheets as well as assessment sheet. This was distributed to all the learners that were targeted in the 3 schools for the pilot. The next thing in teaching at the right level is for you to conduct a one-on-one assessment to determine the learning levels of your learners. So we embarked on a baseline assessment. We already distributed radios. In some cases, these learners, they have radios from the radio lesson that was ongoing. Then through this, we procured telephone lines for the teachers to be able to reach to these learners and conduct one-on-one assessment. Through this, we determine the learning levels of all the learners that were participating in the pilot, and in total we had 327 learners that participated. After the baseline assessment, we categorized them into 3 literacy level as well as 3 numeracy level for the convenience of the adapted blended learning for teaching at the right level. We have those at the beginner level with little or no knowledge of alphabet, and those at word or para, little knowledge in words of fluency, and those at the story level with little knowledge in comprehension. And then in numeracy, we have the ones at 1 digit, 2 digit, as well as 3 digit level. After conducting the baseline assessment, this is the result that we got where the learners are. So for the beginners, we got 71% of the learners as at the beginner. And when you look at the numeracy, 11% were at what level? 1 digit level. So also 19% at 2 and 36% at 3. And then they have mastered all this. So after implementation for 4 weeks, for 10 hours to each level, we got the following result. We succeeded in reducing the number of beginners from 71% to 17%, an improvement of about 60, of about 50 something points. And for those at the next level, it was reduced from 25 to, it was increased from 25 to 38%. And if you go to numeracy, the same thing, we have increased, reduced the number of those at 1 digit from 11 to 3. Those at 2, we reduced them to 5%, and those at the 3, that has improved. We have over 72% who can now operate with 3-digit numbers. After this is the result we got, but the methodology we adopted, as I know the previous speakers have mentioned, TAL is engaging, is full of fun, and is full of creativity, where learners are expected to also participate, contribute in groups, individually. So we decided, apart from reaching the learners in their homes, we created reading hubs in communities, sometimes in nearby schools. This is an example of a reading hub in nearby schools. So children from homes that are close to school are expected to attend this reading hub, where we have a facilitator supporting them, and we have all the requirements for COVID around. So for those that are working in group, it is really engaging. Even for those who are working from home, some do connect through television and they see what is happening in the studio. Some will hear the voice of their colleagues that are working with the teachers in the studio. So we try as much as possible to make it very engaging, full of fun, creative, where learners are participating individually as well as in group. The second thing we put in place, as the lesson is going on, we ensure that there is monitoring in place to check the quality of data we are getting from the field. And we also have weekly review meetings for feedback, where the presenters and those who are supporting the learners will come together and share experiences from the field and also improve on it. So the major challenges we face during implementation of the pilot of adaptation of TAL to blended learning. So we have challenges around effectiveness of the remote or blended learning. Through radio or television, it was difficult for us to target specific level. We group these learners based on their learning levels into 3 numeracy and 3 literacy level. By the time you are airing for those in level 1 or 2, you find some from other levels are also attending based on the questions we are getting. And in the baseline assessment, we discover there is possibility of assistance by caregiver. So at the end of the day, you may not place learners at their appropriate level because they got some level of assistance to be able to answer your question for them to place them at the appropriate level. And we had issues with equity. You know, when we started, we expect parents to support learners with their telephone set, with their radios, but we discover some parents, especially in Northeast Nigeria, most of them are IDPs. They do not have a cell phone or radio. Then we were caught up with equity issues. That is why we decided to do some procurement of these devices to have learners in small group of 10 to 15 to ensure that that issue of lack of cell phone or radio is not excluding learners. And one challenge that we experience when we are trying to bring these master trainers to give them orientation to transport learning materials and to establish learning hubs, you know, by then COVID was at its peak, and they are not seeing education as a life-saving intervention. So we have some challenges. Some have the opinion that through this blended learning by bringing teachers face-to-face and having some children in some learning hubs may even accelerate transmission of COVID, although we have put all the necessary measures in place. These are the challenges we battle with, but the lessons learned so far, we found that the blended learning or the remote adapted TAL was very effective in reestablishing a sense of normalcy for children beyond education outcomes, because we use the platform to provide them with psychosocial support, sensitization around COVID prevention and transmission. So we use this platform to achieve other things for children beyond education outcomes. And also, it was effective in mitigating learning loss and provided alternative modality and various mixes of sometimes no tech solutions, sometimes low or sometimes high tech, because in some instances we have to record the lessons in USB stick and give it to children that, you know, the signal of radio or television is not reaching them. So we found that you can use low technologies or sometimes even high tech to reach learners. And this adapted blended learning proved to be very effective in ensuring that children remain engaged throughout the school closure. Because of this remote learning or blended learning, you know, they are engaged, they are in contact with their teachers. So when schools were reopened, we recorded over 90% of return of learners to TAL classes, because this remote learning kept them engaged during the school closure. So we got over 90% coming back to school. These are some of the lessons learned. And finally, about the next step. Based on the lesson learned, we are of the opinion that we need to enhance this blended learning to serve as a platform for other key services, including health, nutrition, child protection, watch for children during school closure, in terms of not only pandemics, in terms of acute emergency like that of Northeast, where you cannot reach some children, you can use the remote learning platform to provide other key services for learners. And through the same, we need to improve these innovative solutions to make it more effective so that we can have an alternative mode of delivery in terms of acute emergencies or pandemics like COVID. And finally, we need to reinforce focus on equity and inclusion so that all, all, all kind of students are included, are not excluded because of some challenges like the way we provided radio. We need to also provide for children with disability and other equities that need to be considered and that need to be reinforced in terms of blended learning. Thank you for listening. That's all from me for now. Over.
this presentation, we also had an example of how the approach can be applied in very challenging circumstances, like school closures during the COVID crisis. Thanks for sharing your experiences, Yusuf, and also thanks to the audience for posting interesting questions. And I would like to ask one question, Yusuf. And the question concerns how ready or how prepared the teachers were for the blended delivery of teaching that you were referring to. Can you shortly reply on that?
Thank you so much. I think in the slide where I said we conducted oration, already these teachers have been trained on the delivery of teaching at the right level, face to face. So we had orientation of them for them. We had a situation where we had to take them to studio to present lesson. We listened to the lesson, and they get feedback. They repeat it until when we take them to the level where we feel that they can present in studio for us to record it and then present it to learners. So we had so many sessions before then. We have even posted these recordings into platforms where even Pratham and Tal Africa colleagues listened to that and provided feedback. So there were sessions of training of teachers for them to be able to present remotely or in a blended mode. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let us now bring Devyani and Annatura back to the panel to ask some more questions from the audience. And we have a quite active audience in our session, so let's go through some of the challenging questions together with our panelists. A first question that I have here is how to deal with resistance from teachers to change their practices, and also to what extent can teachers be motivated to be involved in extracurricular activities. Devyani, can you start to reply on that question?
So I actually, always use this interesting example from Zambia to talk about teacher motivation. And maybe I'm going to start with that, and then I'll let Anathora and Yusuf share some of their experiences. So I was in Zambia some years ago, and we were visiting the catch-up program with some of our partners. And we had seen a great catch-up class in action. The teacher was very high on energy, on the floor with the children, doing the math activities, having a very good time. And the children were very engaged. And we saw the session for about 30 minutes. And then, the children cleared out, etc. And we sat down to have a conversation with the teacher. And we had another teacher join us from the other classroom. So we were just chatting to the teacher, how is it? And they were saying, oh, catch up is great, and so on and so forth. So then one of the partners who was with us said, I want to ask a question about motivation. Do you mind? I said, no, please go ahead. So the question was, why are you doing this? Right? You're not getting paid extra. You're not getting any incentive. So why are you making this extra effort? And the teacher responded, and I think this is a common response you'll see across countries. She said that I'm doing this because I can see that my children are improving. And I think that's what's important for catch up, right? That faith, the teacher is able to see that the change is happening. You don't even have to wait for validation, right? You see your children changing, you see your classroom changing. You see even those who you thought, oh my God, how am I going to help these kids learn? You see those kids improving. And that's very motivating for a teacher. So I think that that should hopefully help answer part of your question, because I think that's really what's impressive about a program like Teaching at the Right Level, right? You see the change immediately, and that really motivates people to do their best.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I wonder, Anatura, can you agree with what just has been said? Is it also your experience that despite the extra effort that teachers are required to do, that they are motivated, that they do not jump into resistance?
Yes, I think teachers also do not enjoy teaching learners who cannot read, write, or do basic operations. So I think even as a teacher, when you see your children being able to do that, it helps you in all your other regular classes as well. So I definitely agree with Deviani's experience there, but I also wanted to add on that a lot of resistance is often from the bureaucrats, from the province, from the national level, from the district. And so what we do, if you are going to be a master trainer on catch-up, we force you to undertake practice lessons and we coach you and mentor you through. So even if you are a bureaucrat in education system that has not, worked with children in years, we will put you in a classroom and coach you through so that you have that experience. We actually call it baptism in Zambia, like the conversion of, believing in Tao. And we see that that works because then when these trainers go into the field, they're actually training from experience as much as training from theory. Another input I had from schools, I've just been visiting schools in southern Zambia this week, was, the peer pressure. So the more people you train at a school, the more peer pressure there is, the more friendly competition there is. You don't want to be the teacher that has children that are not moving on. So then, when you have a kind of critical mass, I think that also is an element. And I think finally, I can also quote, a ministry officer who looked at a catch-up class and he's like, what are you doing? The children are getting dirty. They're destroying their uniforms. They're not respecting the teacher. Everything is upside down. This goes against, everything we believe. And then after, spending a few days in the field with this officer, when he started understanding the results, he was just like, yeah, whatever it is, if they want to destroy their uniforms, finish all the chalk, put the classroom upside down, as long as they're learning, fine, I'll support it. So I think it's also a nice way to, see it. As long as it works, go with it. So yeah, that's the key.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the other questions that we received has to do with the effectiveness of the program. In that sense, that are there data that are available that the TAR approach is indeed effective on the one hand, and also has a long-term impact? Devyani, can you reply on that, given your experience and long period of experience with the program?
Sure, I can start and others can chime in. So, as I explained in my presentation, Pratham's Teaching at the Right Level program has gone through a series of rigorous evaluations, randomized control trial evaluations conducted by JPAL affiliated researchers over a period of about 15 years. And it was found consistently, even as models changed, as context changed, as we adjusted the delivery of the approach, that there is significant improvement on learning outcomes. In fact, if you go to the JPAL website, you can have access to all of the research papers, all of the evidence. You can also find the same on the Teaching at the Right Level website, which for short is tarl.info. So definitely backed by rigorous research. We have seen over the years that this works. And as we brought the approach to the African context, we also had some pilot, process monitoring, external evaluations, you may call it, to verify the data or to understand whether the program was actually resulting in shifts in learning outcomes. So we have that data to support as well. Of course, all of this in addition to all of the programmatic data that is coming from the different programs.
Okay, thank you. Another question has to do with the scaling up phase of the TAR program. And the question here is, to what extent do you really need digital tools, for instance, big data, to scale up TAR? I think the three of you have experience with the scaling up of the program, but Yusuf, can I start with you to reflect on that? To what extent do you really need digital tools to scale up?
Yeah, based on our experience, and as I have mentioned in one of the slides, one of the lessons we learned that actually you can use no too much technology or very low tech or even high tech to be able to implement. In some instances, we just use USB sticks to record lessons and for learners to go and listen offline. And in some instances, they need to connect to radio transmitters for them to have radio and cell phone. And in some instances, you can use television. So what we are saying, it is adaptable to whatever type of technology is at your disposal. You can use offline technologies, you can use online technology to be able to implement teaching at the right level remotely. Based on our experience, it was a small pilot, although we keep on improving it to be able to activate it when the need arise. And I know Divyani at a point said they have also implemented that remote or blended teaching at the right level. You can also hear from her over.
Mm-hmm. Anatura, can I hear your ideas about this?
So for the Zambian context, working with the ministry, we've actually tried to keep it intentionally low tech. So we try to, use the modes that are commonly used in the ministry. So we try to keep it, analog, but what we do use quite a lot is phone calls, conference calls. We even use, WhatsApp groups to really share, knowledge, to provide mentoring, coaching support. And during COVID, this has become especially important. And we are now also exploring if we can also introduce, maybe some digital data collection methods from the especially SONO level, which is a cluster of schools. And if schools are able to go straight to online data entry as well, then, we would welcome that. But we have been, discussing with ministry that we should always keep an analog option, bearing in mind that, many of our schools do not have electricity and are outside of, proper network coverage area and the like. So as much as you can do a lot with technology, we are trying to keep it within what is already accepted and used in the ministry, but slowly trying small innovations like our data entry, some of this. So we are definitely moving that direction, but with at the pace of the ministry and what they can absorb, so that we don't undermine the sustainability.
Okay, thank you. A question for Divyani, because you mentioned it a couple of times, the importance on data, on monitoring and evaluation and so on. But I wonder what is your experience in order to support implementing partners in their capacity to deal with data, to deal with the monitoring process, to actually carrying out research?
Yeah, so I think Anatora touched on it a bit right now, but of course, one thing I'd like to say, which is linked to what you just said, teaching at the right level data systems, so that is data right from assessments, data compilation, moving data through systems, can be a completely offline process, right? So that's usually where we could start. Let's say when we're working with education systems, if those are the processes that they are used to make sure that the data starts moving through the system and this information is available at all the different levels at the right time. But over time, as teaching at the right level programs mature and grow within a system, we actually see increased interest in the use of the data. And there is also an opportunity created to build capacity to use data in more meaningful ways and bring in systems and processes which are basic, low cost, simple technology that can help speed up these processes and really make data available quickly. If I bring you the example from India, where technology penetration, at least in terms of smartphones, is very, very high across most contexts where we work, especially when we're talking about working with education system actors. Almost every teacher will have a smartphone. We've seen that right down to the teacher level, post the assessment, which is still a one-on-one, offline process, the data can be quickly entered into an app at the teacher level already, and move through the app, through the backend processes, be aggregated and visualized very quickly for everyone in the system to have quick access. So I think it depends very much on the context, the availability of technology, the availability of devices, the ease with use of technology, which influences how much technology goes into actually building the data processes and use of data. But also this can be done completely offline. What is important in teaching at the right level is using that data for action. And this is a process that we help support by giving examples, by posing situations to our partners, by bringing real life examples from the classroom to discussions, so that at every level within a teaching at the right level program system, actors are able to understand how to use data and how to act on it. When it comes to research, I think that's a bit outside the program design aspect. But I think one thing that we are able to influence or to share is to make sure that all research that is being done to influence improvement of programs and not research for research. And I think that's been what we've been able to do with the teaching at the right level evaluations over time as well.
Okay, Devyani, Annatura, and Yusuf, thank you very much for providing these clear answers and also for your enthusiasm on the TOR approach. In conclusion of today's session, I would like to share with you my key takeaway messages from this session. First, it is important to define clear goals for all children for basic reading and math. Second, TOR shows to be an effective approach. And it's interesting to notice that especially pupils at the lowest level are benefiting the most from the approach. And TOR also has flexibility to be adapted in different contexts. And the flexibility also applies to the kind of delivery. For instance, the remote learning case from Nigeria, including remote assessments. Another important characteristic is the continuous monitoring and evaluation. And as a result, I think that TOR can be described as an evidence-informed and an evidence-created educational innovation. A third message I'd like to give is that restructuring education drastically is not a mission impossible. In this case, this included the move from age-based and grade-based differentiation, where we are used to learning level-based differentiation. And also the commitment of leaders of practice as the best teacher trainers is also an important element. And these leaders of practice also systematically mentor and monitor the teachers continuously. As in other cases, I also learned from the graphs that I have seen this afternoon that the baseline assessments and tracking progress of pupil learning are really key components for educational evaluation. And I think that in this type of innovations, it's also important to provide appropriate activities and materials that support teachers in their teaching process and children in their learning process. I have also learned this afternoon that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to prioritizing foundational skills. The challenging circumstances the pandemic created were a kind of authentic stress test for TOR, with a context of school closures and reduced number of contact hours. But despite all the successes that we have mentioned about TOR, there still remain equity issues, for instance, regarding the access to technology. To conclude, we must realize that the TOR approach was not built in one day. There was a development cycle, as we have seen, first with a proof of concept, next small-scale interventions, and next pilots in different contexts to finally scale up in different phases in different contexts. And thus, TAR is the result of a process of experimentation and continuous refinement. And this brings me, ladies and gentlemen, to the final part of today's session. Thanks again to all speakers and to the audience for spending some time with us this afternoon and for sharing your thoughts and questions. Educate.be will be back tomorrow for the fourth and last session of the conference Education Heroes. The topic of this session will take you to the other side of the globe. It's about teaching despite COVID learning crisis in South Asia. Same time, same place, but other and also very interesting speakers. If you haven't done this yet, you can still subscribe to this session on www.educate.be. Do not hesitate to share your thoughts via social media with the hashtag #EducationHeroes. The recordings and the presentation of this session can be downloaded on our website educate.be and will be soon available. And if there are still some questions left without an answer, we will come back to you after the conference by mail. For now, goodbye and thanks to all.